You're listening to the Fresh Hell podcast. Fresh Hell contains stories of a disturbing and often graphic nature and is intended for a mature audience. Please don't let your kids listen to this, or they might turn out like us. Hi, I'm Annie in the US.
And I'm Johanna from Austria, and you're listening to your favorite international podcast.
We're the podcast where arsenic's in the wallpaper, the corsets are all just a little bit too tight, and the macabre is always in fashion.
It's a thing. Vibe.
Yeah. Now, what would be more fitting to that whole aesthetic than the life of the man who practically wrote the playbook for it? P.T. Barnum, the king of curiosities, the maestro of the macabre, and the ultimate showman who turned humbug into an art form and the freak show into a global phenomenon.
So last week we talked a bit about the general basic history of the so-called freak shows or human oddities, cabinet of curiosities, or simply sideshows.
So you know Sideshow Bob from The Simpsons.
You mean Krusty's murderous former assistant? Yeah, sure.
So is he called Sideshow Bob in German? I know sometimes you use English names and sometimes you change them into German versions.
Yeah. Actually, he's called Tingle Tangle Bob in German.
Tingle Tangle Bob. Tingle Tangle is a side.
Tingle Tangle.
He's a Tingle Tangle. That a sideshow?
Not entirely. So a Tingle Tangle was basically like a small, often slightly disreputable venue where you could catch like cheap entertainment, like a 19th century version of the hole-in-the-wall cabaret or variety show, with like acts ranging from musical performances or comedy. And, you would go there for a laugh, a song, a bit of scandal, a little bit of drinking, an escape from everyday life. A Tingle Tangle wouldn't be far off. I think it used to be more of a term in Germany, especially in northern Germany. I'm going to have to ask my friend Ingrid from Hamburg about it. Because in Austria, at the same time, I'd say that would have been more often referred to as Singspielhalle or maybe Varieté. We love to use a lot of French words in Vienna and Eastern Austria.
Yeah, that's why I always like for you to do the French pronunciations. And then we also talked about P.T. Barnum, his early years, childhood up through his wedding to charity. And that is pretty much where we left off last week.
Yeah, pretty much. After their wedding, P.T. Barnum and his new wife, Charity, or Cherry, settled into married life in their hometown of Bethel, Connecticut. But as you might have already guessed, Barnum wasn't exactly cut out for the quiet, small-town existence. And while most people would have been super content with a steady job and a warm home, Barnum was already dreaming of bigger things, or at least anything that didn't involve manual labor, as he had mentioned several times that he's just not cut out for it. As before, to support the household, Barnum dabbled in just about every job you can think of. First, he tried his hand at running a general store, which was a respectable business in a small town like Bethel. But even then, he couldn't resist spicing things up. He started organizing community lotteries. We already told you last week they were legal at the time, and they were a surprisingly popular way for folks to blow their money on very slim odds of a payout. I think the thing with lotteries is that you just, pay a price for dreaming for a couple of days.
That's right. We still do.
Let's just say even back then, Barnum really understood how to turn a crowd's fascination with luck into profit. And when lotteries weren't enough, he branched out into real estate. For a while, Barnum managed to keep things afloat, but nothing he did seemed to scratch that itch for excitement that he had, or make him the kind of money that he dreamed about. He wasn't satisfied just selling groceries or property. He wanted to sell the spectacle. But before we get there, let's talk about one of his early ventures that truly gave us a glimpse of the P.T. Barnum we'd come to know. Of course, Barnum's ambition wasn't limited to business ventures. He wanted a platform, somewhere he could voice his opinions and steer the pot. Enter the Herald of Freedom. In the early 1830s, Barnum launched his very own weekly newspaper, Now, this wasn't your average run-of-the-mill publication. It was a kind of, I want to say, chaotic mix of news, advertisements, reprinted articles, letters, court notices, and of course, Barnum's infamous editorials. All on just 4 pages. He even included notices of marriages, death, and occasionally puzzles or riddles. Here's an example of one, quote, "What must be the diameter in the bottom of a vessel which is 10 feet high and 20 feet square to discharge the vessel full of water in 1 hour?" The answers naturally were published in the next issue so that people would purchase next week's paper as well.
Do we have the answers? I'm not attempting that.
I have the answer. If you listeners out there can send in the answer, we'd be happy to read your name out.
Oh, we'll tell next week then.
In next week's episode.
All right, so we won't tell it now.
Yeah, of course. You have to tune in next week to find the answer to the riddle.
But of course, puzzles and wedding announcements weren't what made the Herald of Freedom notorious. Barnum also encouraged freelance correspondents to send him juicy stories. Think of it as 19th century investigative journalism, but with a healthy dose of scandal. One story reported on the expulsion of a Baptist church member in Utica, New York for, quote, "repeated attempts on the chastity of several virtuous females."
Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun. Well, especially in that case, like, that one almost sounds like a predator, and it sounds like he's exposed him, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Another correspondent, writing under the pseudonym Setbacks, accused a Presbyterian clergyman of spending suspicious amounts of time with his hired girl after his wife went to bed. And if that wasn't enough, Setbacks also claimed this same clergyman was taking female converts to a secluded fishing spot on an unfrequented road. Shocking scandal.
This is shocking, all of it.
Was the Herald of Freedom subtle? No, it was not. But was it entertaining? Yes, definitely. And Barnum's editorial choices weren't just aimed at embarrassing local figures. They were also part of a broader campaign against Orthodox religion, especially the Presbyterians. Barnum himself was a strong supporter of the separation of church and state, and he used his newspaper as a platform to challenge what he saw as the overreach of religious institutions. Of course, all of this stirred up trouble for Barnum. His sharp attacks on religion and authority led to multiple legal actions, the most infamous of which landed him in jail for 60 days on a charge of libel. Now, most people would see jail time as a setback, but for Barnum, it was just another opportunity. He befriended everyone he could, guards, fellow prisoners, and he treated the whole experience as if it was a publicity tour. By the time he was released, his reputation had only grown, and the Herald of Freedom was more popular than ever. Is Barnum the reason for the there's no such thing as bad publicity?
Maybe. And I'm sure this whole time, Charity was like, Phineas, is this really necessary? Do you really have to print that?
Yeah, 2 months in prison, Phineas, really?
Yeah, Barnum's time as a newspaper editor didn't make him rich, but it again taught him something far more valuable, which is controversy sells. Whether it was puzzles, gossip, or pointed attacks on authority, Barnum had figured out how to grab people's attention and keep them talking. And while his newspaper career eventually came to an end, his love for stirring the pot would become a cornerstone of his future success as the self-proclaimed greatest showman. By the way, how he took ending up in jail, something that most people, and I think especially back in the day, would find absolutely humiliating and disgraceful, and turn it around and use it to his advantage. That was a recurring theme in Barnum's life. Like, he had the knack for turning every stumble into a step up. And now we're finally in 1835. P.T. Barnum is making his first big leap into the world of entertainment, and let me tell you, it was controversial right from the start. His venture centered around a woman named Joice Heth, and her story is as troubling as it is pivotal to Barnum's rise. Joice Heth was an elderly African-American woman who was enslaved for most of her life. By the time Barnum came into the picture, she had been freed but was still being exploited for profit. Promoters had been parading her as a so-called living relic, quote unquote, claiming she was 161 years old and had been George Washington's nurse. Yes, you heard that correctly. The George Washington, as in the first president of the United States of America. The hook to pull spectators in was to claim that Joice had cared for the future first president as a baby. They made her sing lullabies, like the lullabies that she had allegedly sung to young George. They had her tell stories about his early years to the public, and the people were absolutely eating this up. They were in absolute awe.
Now, Barnum, always one to sniff out a money-making opportunity, he purchased the rights to exhibit Joice Heth for $1,000, which was, of course, horse money at the time. According to the historical inflation calculator, that would be $35,800 today. So, of course, this is not a small investment, and Barnum wanted to see some return on his money as soon as possible. So he immediately began touring with Joice and marketing her as, quote, the most astonishing and interesting curiosity in the world, end quote. And in true Barnum fashion, he didn't just advertise her, he crafted a whole narrative. Posters and handbills described Joice as a woman who had not only nursed the father of the country, but also witnessed major historical events over the course of her impossibly long life.
I mean, obviously, wouldn't you want to hear the life story of a person who's 161 years old?
Yeah. Especially at a time when there was no other entertainment. We have a flyer. Do we want to read any of it? Oh my goodness. I find it very interesting.
The picture they use of her, that's like...
Yeah.
Unsettling.
Yes. Yes. So it talks about how she was owned as a slave by the Washington family and was the first person to put clothes on the infant General Washington. That's fun. And then it says, age 161 years, she weighs but 46 pounds, and yet is very cheerful and interesting.
We're going to share it in the group.
Yeah, we'll share it. It's, he bought a person.
He bought a person, yeah.
It absolutely didn't matter that the claim of her being 161 years old was obviously absurd. Barnum knew people wanted to believe in something extraordinary, and he played on that curiosity, and I want to say brilliantly, right? He arranged for Joice to give public performances where she would sit in a chair and tell stories about little George Washington. She sang hymns, answered questions from the audience who were captivated by this tiny little frail woman and her supposed connection to history. But let's be clear, this wasn't just clever marketing. This was about as clear a case of exploitation as you'll see. Joice Heth was in extremely poor health. She was blind, she was very frail physically, and she was forced to perform under grueling conditions, often for hours at a time, as Barnum paraded her from town to town.
It must have been so... Can you imagine how exhausting? Even if she would have made a fortune, that's just, it's exhausting. It's exhausting for young people to tour nowadays.
It's really torture to make somebody of that. I mean, we don't know exactly how old she was. She wasn't as old as claimed, but she was certain of an advanced age where she had earned the right to just put her feet up and relax a little bit every now and then. Yeah. This poor woman just had no rest. And her condition made her a very sympathetic figure, which only made tickets sales improve. But it's very clear that she was more of a prop than she was a person to Barnum. Yeah, despite, or maybe because of the obvious exaggeration of her age, Joice Heth drew massive crowds. People couldn't get enough of the idea that they were in the presence of the woman who had rocked George Washington to sleep. And Barnum was more than happy to lead into the skepticism. He published articles himself suggesting that Joice Heth might not be human at all, but an automaton made of whale bones and leather, a mechanical marvel created by someone to fool the public.
I think he published them under
right. Yes.
An alias,
exactly,
like not under his name.
Yes, but these were just all ploys
to steer the controversy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, did you hear? And of course, it was just another one of Barnum's ploys to keep people talking and buying tickets. Joice Heth passed away in February of 1836, just a year after Barnum purchased and began exhibiting her. But even her death didn't stop Barnum from capitalizing on her story. This is now one of the most macabre stunts of his career, because he arranged for a public autopsy to determine Joyce's real age, and yes, he charged admission.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone would have thought otherwise. I think everybody was expecting that he charged admission. And I think this is one of the most horrendous things.
It is, but he never treated her like a human being.
Life.
So,
that's true.
You know, hundreds of people paid 50 cents apiece to watch a surgeon examine her body. The results? The surgeon concluded that Joice Heth was probably no older than 80 years, which should have been the end of the story. But Barnum, he just spun the whole thing as part of the intrigue, claiming that the autopsy couldn't possibly disprove her age.
I think, obviously looking back with modern eyes, the Joice Heth episode is so deeply uncomfortable to think about, and it's a good reminder for us how vulnerable people were and are exploited in ways that are both dehumanizing and profoundly profitable for the people who exploit. And for Barnum, this was his first major step into the world of show business. And while it put his name on the map, it also set the tone for the kind of humbug he would become famous for. I think his success exploiting Joice Heth gave Barnum a sense of what people were willing to pay for, but it also left him hungry for something even bigger. He wanted more than traveling exhibitions or like a fleeting fame. He wanted to create like a permanent place, like a center for entertainment. And in 1841, he found the perfect opportunity right in the heart of New York City. At the time, Manhattan was buzzing with possibility, and we mentioned it before, around the time of the starting industrialization, all these big cities were growing, but it was not all glitz and glamour and clean. It was chaotic, it was overcrowded, and it was full of struggling businesses as well, including in Manhattan a place called Scudder's American Museum. Located on Broadway and Ann Street, Scudder's was a curiosity museum that had fallen on hard times. Thinking of it as quirky, slightly creepy collection of stuffed animals, wax figures, and odd artifacts. So pretty much like this podcast here, very eclectic. Barnum, he saw potential where others saw just a money pit. He purchased the museum in 1841 for $12,000, which in today's monies would be roughly $400,000. This is a massive investment for Barnum. And for him, that meant it was all or nothing. He renamed it to Barnum's American Museum, and he got straight to work transforming it into one of the most talked about attractions in the city.
I know we've mentioned Barnum's American Museum before, but I, for the life of me, cannot remember what episode it was. Can you?
No, there's been so many, but I know exactly what you're talking about, the Confederates.
Yeah, the Confederate Army of Manhattan. We'll get back to that, though. First, let's talk about this museum. Okay. If you're picturing a modern museum full of plaques and quiet reverence, think again, because Barnum's American Museum was less Smithsonian and more circus meets Ripley's Believe It or Not museum. He filled it with eclectic mix of educational exhibits, bizarre hoaxes, live creatures and performances. There were taxidermy animals, stuffed animals, wax figures of historical figures.
Real animals.
Yeah, real animals. And of course, his famous hoaxes. One of the most infamous exhibits was P.T. Barnum's Feejee Mermaid, circa 1842.
I'm looking at the photo right now, and it's quite something.
So Barnum advertised it as the mummified remains of a real mermaid, half fish, half woman. Now, if you're thinking Daryl Hannah in the bathtub and splash, let me go ahead and stop you right there. This is no 6-foot-tall blonde goddess who spouts iridescent scales from the nether regions down once she's submerged in a tub full of salt water. No. This thing is nightmare fuel. This thing looks like the kind of thing that you want to check your toilet for in a horror movie. Do you know what I mean?
That's true. It's true. That is so spot on. That is so
it's just not. It looks like a toilet goblin. Yeah.
I don't like it.
In reality, it was a monkey's torso stitched to a fish's tail. But this was made before the movie Splash made the name Madison popular and before Disney's Little Mermaid, and crowds just loved this creepy little... Oh, it's so many words. I'm like, I think these episodes are kid-friendly so far, so I'm trying not to use vulgar language, but I have thoughts. In any case, Barnum understood that people weren't necessarily paying for the truth. They were paying for the thrill of the unknown, the possibility of magic in a world that was increasingly industrial and logical. But it wasn't just hoaxes. Barnum also featured live performers, and this is where he really began to shine as a promoter. One of his earliest and most famous acts was General Tom Thumb, whose real name was Charles Stratton. Tom Thumb was a little person who Barnum discovered at the age of 4 and began marketing as a man from Europe. He taught Tom how to sing, dance, and perform comedic routines, turning him into an international sensation. The truth was that Charles was born on January 4th, 1838, in Bridgeport, Connecticut, and he had an average-sized infancy. But by the age of 6 months, his growth had slowed dramatically due to proportionate dwarfism, a rare condition that stunted his growth. At his adult height, Charles stood just 25 inches tall, about 63 centimeters, and weighed approximately 15 pounds, or around 7 kilograms. Or for UK folks, that's like a tiny bit over a stone. Barnum discovered Charles in 1842 when the boy was just 4 years old. At the time, Barnum was still building his reputation and saw an opportunity to turn the tiny child into a massive success. But how do you market a 4-year-old? Well, in Barnum's world, you turn him into a 20-year-old European general with theatrical flair. And so, General Tom Thumb was born, a charming, witty, and impeccably dressed performer who enchanted audiences around the world. Barnum trained Charles to sing, dance, mimic famous figures, and perform comedic sketches. The little boy had a natural talent for showmanship, and Barnum wasted no time capitalizing on it. One of Charles' most popular acts was impersonating Napoleon Bonaparte, complete with a tiny replica of Napoleon's uniform, and audiences ate it up. They loved it.
To introduce Charles to the world, Barnum arranged for him to perform at his museum, but he didn't stop there. In 1844, Barnum took Tom Thumb on an international tour, including a wildly successful visit to England, where they performed for Queen Victoria herself. And the Queen was reportedly so charmed by Tom Thumb that she requested an additional private performance. The tour also included visits to France, where Charles met King Louis-Philippe, and to Belgium, where he razzle-dazzled King Leopold I. Charles' success was unprecedented. He became a global celebrity, and people couldn't get enough of his charm and charisma. Barnum marketed him as the perfect blend of adorable and sophisticated, dressing him in tailored suits and top hats to enhance his very distinguished persona. But it wasn't just about performances. Barnum turned Charles into a merchandising sensation. Tiny furniture, miniature carriages, and even dolls modeled after General Tom Thumb were sold to the adoring fans all around. Barnum's marketing machine ensured that the world knew Charles Stratton's name, well, his stage name, and Barnum's, of course. And now, while all of this might sound like pure exploitation, it's also important to note that Charles's story isn't entirely tragic. Barnum actually negotiated a fair financial arrangement with Charles's parents, ensuring that the boy received a portion of the profits, which I mean, you shouldn't forget this is the 19th century, the 1800s, and usually parents would be allowed to take all the money and there would be no problem. What's the name of the guy who played Uncle Fester later in Addams Family?
Oh.
Anyway, that's why child actors nowadays have a law that protects them and their income.
Yes.
That parents just can't. Yeah. Anyway, you know what I'm talking about out there.
Yeah.
So Barnum took care that they didn't spend all of Charles's money. He received a portion of the profits, and by the time he reached adulthood, Charles actually was a wealthy man in his own right. And in 1863, at the height of his fame, Charles married Lavinia Warren, who was another performer with dwarfism, who was equally famous, and their wedding was a massive event, covered extensively in the press, and Barnum, naturally, used it as a publicity goldmine. The newlyweds toured together, performed as a duo, and the marriage remained strong until Charles's death in 1883.
What's interesting to add is even back in the early days of Charles's success, newspaper articles were written totally uncovering the truth about General Tom Thumb. For example, the Portland Press Herald, Friday, May 2nd, 1845, quote, "Thousands must remember the dwarf who came to Paris in 1836. His name was Matthias Julia, and he enjoyed diverse advantages not possessed by General Thumb. He was 22 years old, was therefore his own master, and his visitors had the assurance that there was nothing compulsory in the exhibition of his person. Besides, he had attained the maximum of height and complete maturity. Moreover, he could speak in 3 languages, played at billiards, had some skill in horsemanship, and, to crown all, was under an engagement of marriage. Matthias Julia was therefore a man complete, who only had not taken the trouble of man's dimensions. General Thumb falls greatly short of these advantages. He is a minor, only 14 years of age. He can speak but only one tongue. He may grow much bigger, and his manners are much less polished and genteel than those of Matthias." End quote. Of course, this article isn't entirely correct either, because in 1845, Charles wasn't 14, he was 7. Doesn't matter anyway, people believed what they wanted to believe, and Barnum himself often said that Tom Thumb was one of his proudest discoveries. Another thing that happened in this phase of Barnum's life was the concert tour with the Swedish Nightingale. If you've seen The Greatest Showman, you might remember that one of the major plot points was Barnum falling for another woman, the famous opera singer Jenny Lind, played by Rebecca Ferguson. But let's be very clear, that's once again pure Hollywood. The real story of Barnum and Jenny Lind is fascinating enough without all that added romance. Jenny Lind, known as the Swedish Nightingale, was one of the most famous opera singers of the 19th century. Born in 1820 in Stockholm, Sweden, Lind rose to fame as a soprano with an extraordinary voice and a reputation for humility and generosity. By the 1840s, she was a sensation across Europe, performing for royalty and earning rave reviews. Lind wasn't just talented, she was also deeply admired for her philanthropy, often donating her earnings to charitable causes. P.T. Barnum, ever the opportunist, saw an opportunity to bring Lind's fame to America. Here's a fun fact. When Barnum decided to promote her, he had never even heard her sing. All he knew was her reputation as a superstar, and for Barnum, it was enough. In 1850, he offered Lind an astonishing $1,000 per concert, an enormous sum at that time, roughly $35,000. Lind agreed, but on the condition that Barnum donate a portion of the profits to charity. Charity, as in donations for philanthropic causes, not charity as in Barnum's wife, of course. Yeah, I'll give it to charity, no problem. I could just...
I'm sure he thought about it. I'm sure he thought
right?
about it.
Barnum being Barnum turned the tour into a massive spectacle. He launched a full-scale marketing campaign even before Lind arrived in America, building up her mystique to near mythical proportions. She arrived on board one of the ships of the Collins Line, a steamer named Atlantic, on the 1st of September, 1850. By the time she stepped off the boat in New York, crowds were waiting to catch a glimpse of her, even though most Americans had never heard her sing. All the buzz around Jenny Lind arriving led to some pretty funny situations. The Evening Post, Friday, September 6, 1850, page 2, quote, "The excitement, the curiosity which prevails to see Jenny Lind led to one or two awkward mistakes yesterday. A lady who had just arrived from abroad went to the custom house to get some goods passed, when somebody whispered that she was Jenny, and instantly the lobbies and steps were filled with a crowd eager to see the vocalist as she came out. When the lady made her appearance and drove off in her carriage, she was followed by 3 loud cheers. As she was a perfect stranger in the country, this warm greeting must have surprised her into strange notions of American hospitality." It's like, wow, you guys are very friendly. Another lady from Staten Island had occasion to call at the Irving House to see a friend, leaving her carriage at the door. It was soon noised about among the crowd, who hang around the private entrance, that it was the carriage of Jenny Lind. When the lady appeared, she could hardly make her way through the admiring throng, and when she at last drove off, a motley crowd went shouting after her as far down as the Staten Island ferry. End quote. So, yeah, it caused quite a bit of excitement there.
And as expected, the tour was a financial triumph. Lind performed over 90 concerts and earned a staggering $350,000 during her tour, which is an equivalent to over $12 million today. And if you kind of did the math now in your head and ask how, well, Jenny Lind was guaranteed $1,000 per concert, but her total earnings came from a share of the ticket sales as well. Barnum's marketing genius had ensured sky-high demand, and he even auctioned off tickets for some of her performances, driving prices even higher. That's genius. That's really genius.
Mm-hmm.
And her concerts, of course, were all sold out, and the public couldn't get enough of her. And true to her philanthropic nature, the Swedish Nightingale donated much of her earnings to charity, which made the public even love her more, while Barnum walked away with a huge fortune. And the partnership was mutually beneficial. Lind became a household name in America, and Barnum cemented his reputation as the ultimate showman. Now, let's talk about the rumors. So some people speculated that Barnum and Lind's relationship went beyond professional admiration, fueled in part by their close working relationship and Lind's undeniable beauty and charm. But there's no evidence to suggest an affair ever took place. Barnum was married to Charity, and by all accounts, their marriage remained intact through the tour. And Lind, for her part, was known for her very moral character and didn't seem interested in a scandal. She doesn't appear like the kind of person who would go after a married person.
No.
And, fact, their relationship became strained towards the end of the tour. Jenny Lind eventually grew very tired of Barnum's relentless promotional tactics and cancelled the remaining performances, and she preferred to perform on her own terms from that on. So yeah, the movie dramatized their relationship for effect. The real story is one of mutual benefit and professional respect, at least for most of the time together. Barnum saw Lind as an opportunity to introduce a new kind of cultural entertainment to America, and Lind used her platform to do good on a massive scale. While all that was going on, Barnum was also relentlessly working on promoting and bettering his museum. Of course, the museum wasn't just about entertainment, it was also a place for moral education, or at least that's how Barnum pitched it, or maybe that's what he wanted it to be. He offered lectures, he offered historical reenactments and dioramas designed to appeal to families and, those seeking wholesome amusement. But make no mistake, the real draw was the bizarre and unexpected.
Just like us.
Just like us.
Yeah, we cover true crime, but our real draw is just the bizarre and unexpected.
You never know what you're gonna get.
You don't.
every week.
No, facts. You're going to get some facts.
The next fact about the American Museum was really kind of shocked me. I would have never thought that at its peak, the museum attracted up to 15,000 visitors a day, making it one of the most popular attractions in the United States. And just for comparison, I looked up the numbers. The British Museum in London also attracts 15,000 daily visitors during peak season.
Wow.
Today.
Wow.
And the Louvre has roughly 30,000 visitors per day with, some spikes in tourist seasons. Just like Barnum's museum, the Louvre houses very eclectic, to use the word again, mix of artifacts, art, and curiosities. But I have to say the Mona Lisa is no match for the Feejee Mermaid.
The Feejee Mermaid smile is just
enchanting.
It's just a rictus of...
Terrifying is the word I was looking for.
Toilet goblin. It's fine.
Unlike most old and serious museums nowadays, Barnum was constantly updating his American museum, and he was adding new exhibits and acts to keep people coming back. He was also the master of marketing, and if an exhibit wasn't drawing enough attention, he either throw it out or he'd whip up a sensational story to reignite interest. The funniest story I read, or one of the funniest stories I read, that he realized people were spending too much time in the museum. He just wanted them to spend their money, go walk through, and then get the fuck out of there because he wants, a constant visitor stream going through. And so what he did, he put up signs that said, this way to, and he used an old-fashioned term for exit. I don't remember what it was. Egress, something like that. And just like me, people didn't know what that was, and they thought it's this super fascinating, you have to see this part of the exhibition. So they hurried up, and then they were just at the exit and had to leave. And I thought that's, again, genius.
That is genius.
The museum also became Barnum's headquarters. It was the center of his ever-growing empire, and from here he worked on his reputation as the greatest showman, and many of his most famous acts started here, including some like the conjoined twins Cheng and Eng Bunker, or the so-called What Is It?, who was a performer with microcephaly, whom Barnum marketed as, again, a missing link between humans and apes.
Awful. And we think we've touched on this before in one of our many previous episodes. We just can't remember which one. But in 1864, a group known as the Confederate Army of Manhattan attempted to set fire to multiple locations across New York City in an effort to disrupt the Union. Their targets included hotels, theaters, and even Barnum's museum, which by then had become one of the most iconic landmarks in Manhattan. On the 25th of November, 1864, fires were set in several locations, including the museum. However, the flames were contained before they could cause any serious damage, and the building was spared, and the Confederate plot ultimately failed. Unfortunately, the museum's luck didn't hold. Less than a year later, on July 13, 1865, disaster struck. A fire broke out inside the museum, and this time it spread rapidly. The building's wooden structure, combined with the highly flammable contents inside, wax figures, theatrical props, and taxidermy exhibits, turned the museum into a tinderbox. The fire quickly engulfed the museum, and while visitors and staff managed to evacuate, much of the collection was lost. The wax figures melted, the taxidermy animals burned, and the heat destroyed countless artifacts. The exact cause of the fire remains unclear to this day. Theories range from a malfunction in the museum's gas lighting system, a common but dangerous technology of the time, to simple human error, like a dropped lamp or improperly extinguished cigarette. Some have even speculated on arson, given the Confederate arson plot targeting the museum just the year before, but there's no evidence to confirm foul play. What we do know is that once the fire started, the museum was doomed. The blaze was devastating, both for Barnum and for the city. The following is from the Buffalo Daily Republic, Saturday, July 15, 1865. Page 2. Quote, Destruction of Barnum's Museum. The destruction by fire of Barnum's Museum in New York will occasion more universal regret than the destruction of any other public building could possibly have caused. It had a worldwide reputation. It was a great feature in the great commercial metropolis of the nation. No visit to New York was considered completed unless Barnum's Museum had received a large share of one's attention. Theater, menagerie, and museum, it never failed to amuse, instruct, and astonish. To return from New York and not be able to regale the little ones at home, who, with eager eyes and open mouths, were all attention with a graphic description of the latest curiosities at the wonderful Barnum's, was a disappointment never to be forgiven. The museum, with its big whales and little fishes, its giants and giantesses, its rare collection of birds and beasts, its curiosities of arts, science, and nature, its fun and humbuggery, was a source of unfailing interest to all and national pride. The building and its collection are gone. The old landmark in Broadway is obliterated, but Barnum still lives, and it will not be long before he will be in full blast again. If there is a fattest woman, smallest baby, oldest man, or anything that has never before exhibited on earth to be had, Barnum will find them. End quote. And then the next one is from the Brooklyn Daily Times, Friday, July 14th, 1865, page 2. Quote, We don't expect Barnum to sit down and cry over his heavy loss. It is probably more ludicrous than sad to him. He will have his joke, we are sure, over his roast elephant and will blubber over his boiled whales. Then he'll go to work and put up another museum, larger and better in every way than the old favorite of the public for the last 30 years. It is reported that he has already decided upon a location near Canal Street on Broadway, with the design, we suppose, of accommodating the people of this district. We wish he may succeed soon in carrying out this scheme. It is for the interest of this district that a place for cheap and innocent amusement should be provided speedily within easy reach of us, and Barnum is the man who can do it. We shall miss the old curiosities, but we expect Barnum will cause us to forget our loss and the public loss by providing for us greater and better. End quote. No pressure.
But I just wanted to say they didn't put pressure at all on him, right?
Jeez.
But I think they just knew he wouldn't just, disappear or lean back and do nothing. Yeah. And isn't it crazy that basically immediately after the fire, Barnum was already like, okay, let's do that again.
Yeah.
No whining, just like, getting right back to work. And seriously, the very same year, he opened a new venue in New York City, which he named Barnum's New American Museum. And again, it was all designed to draw massive crowds. But despite Barnum's best efforts, the second museum never quite recaptured the magic or the popularity of the original. And then, just 3 years later, disaster struck again. On 3rd of March, 1868, a fire broke out in the new museum. Again, like before, the building's flammable contents, the wax figures, the theatrical props, the taxidermy animals, all of that made it absolutely impossible to contain the blaze. The second museum was also completely destroyed, and this time Barnum decided not to rebuild. He was just done with it, and I think understandably so. The era of the American Museum was over, but for Barnum it was simply time to shift gears. After the second fire, he turned his attention to the world of traveling circuses, a venture that would make him even more famous. Because next up we have the greatest show on earth. In 1871, Barnum launched P.T. Barnum's Grand Traveling Museum, Menagerie, Caravan and Circus. That's a mouthful.
Yeah.
But I think the name was definitely part of the draw. Maybe we should have a name like that.
Well, remember originally the whole name of the podcast was going to be Fresh Hell Podcast Murder Mystery and the Macabre Through History or whatever. It was like, that's too much. We should have.
I think the name was definitely part of the draw because it promised spectacle, variety, and the unexpected. And I also think it has some kind of, more high-class ring to it.
Yeah.
In a way. The show combined elements of the American Museum, which were the curiosities, the live performers, and the exotic animals, with the excitement of the traveling circus, which was becoming more and more popular at the time. The logistics were extensive. The circus traveled by train, complete with its own custom cars for the performers, animals, and props. Barnum didn't just bring the show to the people, he brought the parade too. I think that was even his invention, or he was the first to have this idea, because before every performance, the circus would march through town with the performers, animals, music, the colorful floats, and he drew the crowd in. When Barnum came to town, it was a spectacle.
Yeah. The thing that's also nice about that is that even if you were not in a place where you could even afford a ticket, at least you got to see something.
Yeah, you got to see the elephants.
Exactly. Yeah. As much as I wish that they were never part of the show, you know what I mean?
Yes, of course. Yeah, obviously.
So, yeah. By 1875, Barnum had rebranded the show as the greatest show on earth, which perfectly captured his signature blend of spectacle and audacity. The circus featured everything from aerialists to clowns, and of course exotic animals like lions and tigers. It was also home to human curiosities, performers with unique physical conditions, continuing a theme from Barnum's earlier career. But even as Barnum's professional life reached new heights, his personal life was marked by loss. His wife, Charity, who had been his partner for over 40 years, passed away in 1873. They had been married since 1829 and had raised 3 daughters together. Caroline Cornelia, born in 1833, Helen Maria, born in 1840, Frances Irena, born in 1842, who tragically passed away in infancy in 1844, and Pauline Taylor, who was born in 1846. Charity had been by Barnum's side through every triumph and disaster, but by 1873 her health was failing, and on November 19, 1873, she passed away at their home in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Barnum was later describing Charity as the steadying force in his life.
Yeah, I think he also said she was his moral compass and his anchor.
Yeah, I'm sure. Less than a year after Charity's death, Barnum remarried. In 1874, he wed Nancy Fish, the daughter of a wealthy British cotton merchant. Nancy was 40 years younger than Barnum, which raised eyebrows at the time, but the marriage seemed to suit Barnum's needs in his later years. I'm sure it did. Nancy often accompanied him on his travels, and she supported his circus ventures, even though their relationship didn't really seem to have the same emotional depth as his first marriage had. Meanwhile, Barnum's circus continued to grow and became a huge national and international success. And a man who played a major part in that was, of course, James Bailey. And this is the perfect time to stop for today, I think, because next week we're going to be talking more about The Greatest Show, Barnum's life and death, more facts about his wealth, lots of controversies, what his stars thought about him back in the day. Yeah, we'll talk more about his most famous performers, and then tell you a little bit more about how sideshows continued after Barnum's death and a few stories of those who were exploited well into the 21st century. Do you think we're going to be able to talk about all of that in one, or is this another 4-parter?
I hope. We'll see. We'll see where it takes us.
Stay tuned.
My something good for this week, I have to tell you about my Christmas presents this year were kind of in a theme, apparently. My family kind of talked to each other. It started that my sister gave me, well, let's say, I don't know if you're all aware, but I'm a huge fan of Snoopy and in extension the Peanuts, but it's mostly Snoopy. I'm actually wearing a Snoopy sweater right now. Always loved him, and ever since we have a beagle, now I love Snoopy even more. And so my sister gave me an advent calendar with Snoopy socks, which was awesome. And then my husband gave me for Christmas the most adorable Snoopy mug with a lid, so you can cover it, and a Snoopy cookie jar, and, which is the most awesome stuff and motivates me every day when I go to the gym, a Snoopy gym bag.
Oh, I love that.
So that's my something good for the week, my awesome Snoopy Christmas.
That is an awesome Snoopy Christmas. Aww.
How about you?
So we've been in this house for 10 years, almost 11 years. And as soon as we moved in, I wanted to change out the hanging light in the room that we spend all of our time sort of sitting in. It was a perfectly fine light. It was just the previous owners of the house had the area I've set up as sort of a snug or a den off the kitchen where the fireplace is. They had it set up as a eat-in kitchen, like they had their dining room there, and their snug space or den space was in where we have our dining room. So it had cute little, it was like a farmyard, and it was a cute lamp. It's just the wrong, you know what I mean? Not the right style for the den. And one of the things that I've really taken from therapy lately is I'm trying to be a whole lot better in 2025 about not letting perfect get in the way of better.
Yeah.
Right? That's something I'm really, really problematic about, because I'll wait until it's going to be perfect. I don't want to do it unless I know it's going to be right and it's going to be perfect. And so I end up not doing a lot of stuff because I'm so anxious that I'm going to make the wrong choice, or you know what I mean? And it's it's fine.
Well,
it's better.
I get totally what you mean. Yeah. Because, for example, we had this whole room here that was just a whole mess, and I didn't want to put up a whole office because we're not done renovating.
Yeah.
And so for 3 years, I was rather living without an office and with another room that I could use perfectly fine for an office, but I didn't. And then I was like, this November, I'm just gonna clear out this room, make an interims office that I can use for now. And it's amazing and I love it. And that's exactly what you say. Why just keep waiting for it to be perfect when in the meantime we can have it so much better and nicer? Yeah.
Because part of the problem with me as well is recognizing that I'm never going to think anything is perfect.
That too, yeah.
Everything's always, even when I think it's going to be perfect, it's a little disappointing that I don't feel better about it. And I don't know if it's an ADHD thing or what it is, but I never feel, you know how people will say, just do it. You get such a feeling of accomplishment. I never have a feeling of accomplishment. I just never have that feeling ever. So it's not a motivator, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? It's just anxiety. It's I'll buy it and I'll put it up and I'll think, oh, I should have done better, or I should have done this. But it's been great. I've just been making choices. It started not to advertise Amazon, but I had some really expensive dishes that Adam and I had gotten Denby when I married him 20 years ago, and then Paul and I got Denby. And we had some problems. We needed a new set of china, and I was driving myself insane trying to find the perfect replacement that wasn't going to cost a ton. Long story short, Amazon Basics stoneware. It's cheap. It looks great. I'm so happy with it. And if it breaks, then I can buy more. It's just Amazon. You know what I mean? It's been really freeing.
You know what I started to realize over the years, things like that, when you say dishes, for example, I always thought everything has to match and everything has to be a set, and I can't buy things that don't match. But now I'm way more relaxed with these things, and I'm like, as long as I like it and I think it looks good, and even if every plate on the table looks different, it also has its charm and
absolutely,
you know
yes, I mean? Very much so. Yeah,
it's freeing.
It is freeing. Yeah. Yes.
I think there's so much beauty in the imperfect.
That's right.
That's what
yes, I totally agree. So I'm very grateful to Paul for hanging that lamp up and assembling it and all that jazz. And yeah, no more chickens and roosters in the den. They've been rehomed. Awesome. They've gone into a farm-themed kitchen. So
I remember that you talked to me about this lamp since we met.
Oh, it's been an ongoing, yeah. So this is just the beginning. Look out, world. I'm going to hang curtains. I'm going to buy bedding that I don't love. It's fine. Doesn't have to be perfect. It's fine. Thanks so much for listening, everybody.
If you enjoyed this episode or any of our other episodes, please do us the huge favor and go to your podcast app and leave us a rating and or review.
Our website is freshhellpodcast.com. You can find all sorts of information there, how to contact us, more information about our Patreon.
Please tell your pets we said hi, hug them, cuddle them, treat them kindly. Be kind to your fellow human beings. And you know what? Even if you don't like P.T. Barnum, you can really learn a lesson from him. He had the opposite of imposter syndrome. And he really was very kind to himself. And he believed in himself.
He did.
And that's the lesson you can learn from him.
That's right. Absolutely. And if you yourself are going through hell,
keep going. Tschüss.
Bye.